Hello, everyone. This is Lala, and today I'm going to be talking about an interesting season in the challenge lexicon, and that is Battle of the Seasons 2012. So I do find it interesting that they decided to do a sequel to Battle of the Seasons literally a decade later, since the first one aired in 2002 and the second one aired in 2012. But due to the decade time frame, there's like no connection pertaining the cast, as it's a completely new set of people. Essentially, two generations came and went by the time the second Battle of the Seasons took place, and the first one was really trying to establish who would be able to carry the rest of Era 1, and it was really the first of its kind, since it's the first time where there are returnee challengers. With this season, you can definitely tell that a lot of the Era 2 people either left or were going to leave a bit after this, or are taking very long hiatuses. And with there not being many Era 1 people at this point in general, whether they left for good or they were on their long hiatus, they definitely needed to establish some new people who could carry the torch for what would eventually be known as Era 3. And like the first battle of the seasons, this one has a lot of filler people who are very invisible, only did one season, or did two seasons, and really didn't have much longevity. But we did get a lot of mainstays and Era 3 defining people here, so I guess in that way it is successful. Apparently, Key West was signed on to do the season, so Paula, Janelle, Tyler, and Johnny Bananas, but they were taken off for some weird reason. Though, in my opinion, I just think that they wanted more newer faces, and if the Key West players were there, they would take over like they always did, and all four of them are champions. And Sydney was supposed to be on as well. Apparently, they flew out to Turkey and they filmed an intro, but they came up with this concocted bull crap story about Isaac having a heart condition. Though when he returned to the States, the doctors there stated that he didn't have a heart condition. So it's clear that they just wanted a bunch of new people. Maybe they wanted to do it because they wanted to save money. So when it comes to the actual season, when I watched it for the first time, I loathed it. I found it to be so insufferable. I wanted to throw things at the screen. I wanted to punch anything that was around me, and I just found it to be a very intolerable experience. But my opinion kind of changed with the rewatch, and I found myself somewhat enjoying it, and I found it a lot more watchable than I thought it was in my last rewatch. I don't know if it's because I really, at this point, I have now watched the Era 1 and Era 2 seasons, so now I have the additional context regarding things could be much worse. But at the same time, some of the issues that I had the first time still stand. There are way too many people on the season, and of course, a lot of them got lost in the shuffle and had very poor edits. But the few that stood out really left their mark here, and they really made names for themselves. I did find it impressive that all of the newbies decided to take out the veterans so this season could be theirs and so they could have names for themselves and so they can establish legacies for themselves. And I really do appreciate that. And I think it's like the only time it actually happened. At the same time, you do miss the presence of some of the veterans at this point, but at the same time, you need some of those seasons every once in a while to see who can survive without the veterans, which new faces they can bring into the fold, so on and so forth. And this is also around the time where a lot of the Fresh Meat 2 rookies started either leaving the show, they're about to leave, or they were taking long hiatuses. So even people who were introduced later on in Era 2 were starting to lose their time on the show. Anyways, I did think that the format was solid enough where one team automatically goes into elimination, the other team has to choose the other team to go into elimination, and outside of those teams of four, two people have to go into elimination and they'll be eliminated as a pair. So let's just get to it. The cast arrives in Turkey, where TJ mentions that it is now Battle of the Seasons. It's technically Battle of the Seasons too, but they don't mention that part, where they are going to be separated by the real world season. Also, a difference between this one and the last one is that half of the teams were from Road Rules and half of the teams are were from Real World. Obviously, Road Rules was done like 7 years ago, give or take, by this point. So obviously, all the teams would only be from the Real World, and most of the Road Rules challengers weren't on the show anymore. Anyways, we have the teams which are the Real World Austin, which includes Wes, Lacey, and Divorcees, Melinda and Danny. New Orleans, which includes Jemmy, Mackenzie, and Enemies President and Knight. Cancun, which includes Jonay, Jasmine, Derek, and CJ, and they are all very close. San Diego, which includes the exes, Ashley and Zach, as well as Sam and Frank, who is now friends with Zach after hating him on the Real World season. Las Vegas is represented by both seasons since there was a 2001 or 2002 season and a 2011 season, where we have Trishelle and Alton from the first Vegas season and Nani and Dustin from the second Vegas season. To me, it's clear that they just wanted long time and long missing veterans like Trishelle and Alton to return, hence the weird team, despite Leroy being a regular at this point and I guess Naomi as well. And the other team is Brooklyn, which includes Sarah, JD, Denvin, and Chet. And the most recent season at the time, St. Thomas, which has Marie, Rob, Laura, and Trey. The winning team gets $250,000 for the season, $50,000 for second place, and $40,000 for third place. And they're competing in the arena this season. And that's what the elimination area is called. One guy and girl from each team will decide who goes into the arena after each vote and round. We see the cast having fun, and the St. Thomas crew, mainly Trey and Marie, are planning about them being the new season could be an advantage for them. San Diego decides to clear the air where Frank is better towards Ashley about her being wishy-washy, and he doesn't trust her, which is definitely a sign regarding the messiness with this team that we will see throughout the season. Danny and Melinda are talking about how they got married for the wrong reasons, and Wes is joking about how the two of them still want and miss one another. Alton and Dustin speak about how smart Trishelle is, which will change as the season goes on, and Dustin wants to make up for being DQ'd last season, and Alton feels physically at his peak compared to the past, so he's expecting to do very well. Devin and Preston are talking about Mackenzie, and they are taking it pretty easy, where Knight is more annoyed with Preston than ever, where his cheating is quote unquote an accidental mistake, and Jemmy ended up donating all of his clothes after the breakup, which I found to be pretty funny. Sarah and Chet are worried about Devin, since they know from the Real World season that she is lazy as hell, but it has been 4 years since their season, and Sarah is now single, whereas she was in a relationship last season. Zach and Frank are in pink Speedos, and it's shocking seeing Zach be so freeing in his flamboyance. But Janae especially is crushing hard on Zach, where Jasmine is encouraging her to go for it. CJ is not over Wes screwing him over on Fresh Meat, which was like 3 years ago at this point, if I remember correctly. So he wants to get his revenge. Wes mentions to Trey that he is not targeting his season, and Trey made it clear that he was a fan of the real Austin, which Wes is definitely using to his advantage. One more tea is added to the cast, where it is Fresh Meat, which is Cara Maria, Camilla, Brandon, and Eric. There's so much behind the scenes tea about all the teams, which I could probably make a video about on its own, because there's that many details about it. Anyways, Don't Cross Me is the daily, where they have to climb a ladder and cross a beam high up in the water, and the Austin team is worried about Lacey. Eric is screwing up for the Fresh Meats team, and they're going right into elimination due to being last, with Cancun beating Las Vegas in the daily, and this was all clearly very foreshadowed. Wes is throwing shade at CG, but he knows that he's in trouble, and Wes is whining about how his real friends get him, but these people don't. Cancun is for sure sending Austin in, but they want to speak to St. Thomas for them to give their pitch, and they are definitely trying to pressure St. Thomas to choose the right side, and it's a very weird conversation. Anyways, Cancun sends in Austin at the deliberation, and TJ tells them that the daily winners get to choose one of the 4 eliminations, and CJ chooses a physical elimination. Both teams in the elimination have to choose a guy and a girl to go into elimination, or the daily winners decide it if they can't decide, meaning the losing team can't decide. Wes ends up holding some sort of a house meeting where he mentions that they have horrible vibes, and CG made a dumb move where Jasmine tells Wes to stop playing the victim, essentially. Eric knows that he is going in, and Carmilla volunteers herself to go in, since they know that they will win a physical elimination. Everyone is drinking, Zach and Frank decide to kiss in good faith, and the two of them start wrestling around, but Frank is way too hammered, and Zach is trying to get him to go to bed. Frank decides to he decides to pick a fight with Wes for some reason, where he mentions that he is better than Wes in everything, and he's trying to push him around. And I think he pushes Danny, who then tries to fight Frank at this point. Frank is somewhat consoling Frank and is literally pinning him down on the floor, where Sam tells him that he is destroying the team. Frank then gets up and tries to lash out at Sam. Zach and Janae are getting to know one another, and they are clearly feeling one another, where they are kissing. The issue is, Janae started seeing someone right before the season and does not want to cheat, but Jasmine knows that her getting with Zach will benefit their team. Janae does end up calling the guy that she is with back home to essentially break up with him, and I guess props to her for actually breaking up with him before going full in and not having a blown out affair on the challenge. Cara Maria and Camilla are arguing about who is going to volunteer, where Camilla mentions that Cara Maria already volunteered, so this conversation is pointless. And Cara Maria thinks that Danny might not. She thinks that Danny might be going in instead of Russ, and Eric also doesn't like her attitude, with Camilla also threatening to throw a challenge in the future if they keep up with this bullcrap. Hobrow is the elimination where they have to run through their opponents to get to the bell on the opposite end, and they're running through a very tiny wall space. And of course, Carmaria beats Lacey, and Eric demolishes Wes, who hits his head on his own bell after being trampled. Danny and Melinda come back from the elimination, realizing that they need to figure out something to work together, just the two of them. I don't have much to say about the boots here. I don't blame Wes for his downfall here, like I did blame him for his downfall last season. The newbies clearly wanted to get rid of the veterans, and while I do think his shtick was repetitive by this point in time, there wasn't much for him to do. Lacey just seemed so out of depth this season, with doing the show 7 years after the real world, clearly not being the type that would do the show anyways, and I'm sure she was only on it because Johanna refused a spot, so yeah. We see the cast hanging out on the beach side or by the beach side, and it's cool to see. Sarah is having a crush on Alton, and we see Jemmy and Knights together, where she is rubbing his back, and he claims to only be doing the challenge just so he can win her back. Melinda is talking to Alton about how she has a great home life with her boyfriend, and this is her first time seeing Danny in 3 years. And Danny is also talking to Knight about how he has a lady that he has a good life with, and he's very cognizant about being in the same room as Melinda. I don't know if this man is the same person who became her husband, but I just want to add that in there. Anyways, Frank is bragging about running the Alliance and knows that Austin and Fresh Meat and Brooklyn are coming after him and San Diego, with his alliance consisting obviously of San Diego, Vegas, New Orleans, and Cancun. Though things definitely start to change with Vegas sooner than later, and New Orleans just isn't that good, where they are the newbies who want to have their turn in doing well on the show. St. Thomas is playing the middle between the rookies and the vets, and Trey does not want to play the political game, which is starting to annoy Marie. The daily is oil change, where they are engaging in an oil wrestling match, and I do like this daily challenge, where it is individualized, and the oil made it interesting as well. Frank and Camilla start shading one another, and I have no sides with this whatsoever, since they both annoy the hell out of me. It is clear that the main alliance plot it in a way where they can strategize a winner, and they agree to have San Diego win the challenge. Chet thinks that Cancun are being idiots since the rookies usually go in, but he doesn't really know the dynamics. The veterans try the same strategy with Fresh Meat, Austin, and Brooklyn try to strategize for a winner, but it doesn't really make much of a difference. Austin is automatically going into elimination for getting last in the challenge, and San Diego continues the rookie revolution, where it is clear that they are going to throw in fresh meat again. Actually, no, I think fresh meat got last in the challenge. But anyways, it's going to be Austin versus fresh meat again. Eric and Cara Maria decide to speak to the others, and Cara Maria is annoyed that they have to campaign to rookies instead of it being the other way around. San Diego reaches out to St. Thomas so they can add more numbers to the rookies versus vets war, and Trey outright states that he doesn't see it as that, and Frank and Zach are just annoyed as hell with him and his carelessness regarding the strategic element. And Marie is annoyed that Trey is blowing it for them, which could easily ruin their spot. Anyways, Fresh Meat is going in, and TJ tells them that if they can't decide the two nominees, the winners will decide it. So they are going to the club, and we have Jonay and Zach dancing with one another and getting closer, where it seems like Laura and Trey are rekindling things from their real season, while Jimmy shuts down at night. Melinda is trying to give advice since she does not want them to be like her and Danny, and she is trying to mediate where Jimmy feels like Knight is weaponizing giving her a wing so he can control her essentially, and Melinda doesn't see Knight as a Danny since I do believe Jimmy made that comparison. Knight rants to Danny about how Jimmy continuously calls him at night or late at night, and Danny essentially tells him to get it together. It is a game, and the relationship stuff really isn't important. Though he kind of sees Knight as how he was 5 years ago. And if I'm doing the math on this would have been around fresh meat time. No, this would have been around like the Inferno 3, maybe Gauntlet 3 time, essentially. Camilla and Carmilla argue yet again about who is going to volunteer out of the women, and Brandon doesn't want to volunteer since he's performing better than Eric in the dailies. Since Fresh Meat cannot decide who to go in, San Diego chooses to send in Eric and Camilla, though Frank wants Austin to come back, so there'll be two teams of two. Balls out is where the balls are attached to ropes above them, and they have to push the most balls to the other side. Honestly, I don't really care much for this elimination whatsoever, but we do have Camilla and Eric beating the divorcees. Trey is ranting to Laura about how the house hates him, and he feels like they're going to be on the chopping block soon. I do think that this was a nice way to not only have Melinda and Danny have closure within themselves, but I do think their arc on TV ending with the season was good too. They communicated well, they both have partners, and all the baggage is done, with him giving advice to others. This was the best time for the journeys on the flagship to end, though I think they were only on this season for circumstantial reasons. We do see a new side of Melinda on the All Star series, which is ironic since she didn't care for the challenge in the beginning, and Danny wanted it to be his thing, but we haven't seen him since, and I don't think we will ever see him again. Eric and Devin are getting really close with one another, and it seems like they're gaining a crush on the other. We also see Sarah and Alton bonding a lot, and they are both very athletic, which they are bonding over. Trishelle is worried about Alton getting close to Sarah, since many alumni told her before the season started that Sarah is conniving and manipulative, so she needs to watch out. Trishelle tells CJ that she wants Cara Maria gone, and I think Sarah gone as well, since the Alliance agreed to boot Austin, then Fresh Meat, and then Brooklyn, in that order. But Alton's relationship with Sarah is ruining that, and we do see Alton and Sarah cuddling one another in bed. The daily is hook, line, and sinker, where they have to move from platform to platform with just using a hook. And I don't care for this daily at all. Eric falls immediately, causing Fresh Meat to be in dead last, and they will go into elimination. Las Vegas gets the win over Cancun, and Sarah is hoping that this will save her from getting sent in. Trishelle immediately campaigns to Chet and Sarah, or sorry, she campaigned for them to go into elimination with Fresh Meat, and Alton refuses since he respects the team as competitors, and the new Las Vegas team are letting them go at it on the bus ride back. Since Trishelle just sees it as him trying to save Sarah, but this shouldn't be shocking since Alton never really cared for alliances at all. Anyways, the big alliance are worried that Las Vegas is going rogue against the alliance, and Sarah is worried. Trishelle rants and complains to Devin, who thinks that Sarah should just volunteer to go in, and Trishelle walks off as soon as she sees Sarah. Autumn is complaining about what is happening, and Dustin mentions that he is on a power trip, where Autumn refuses to listen to Nanny or Dustin in this conversation at all. Vegas 2.0 complains about Autumn, and then Trishelle joins the conversation to complain about him as well. It is decided that Brooklyn is going to be sent into the elimination, and that strategy is the type of elimination that they will be doing. Alton is annoyed with being outvoted on his team and doing what the Alliance said. Sarah confronts Trishelle about the motivations for the team being voted in, and Trishelle mentions that her showmatch with Alton is ruining the Las Vegas team, where Sarah thinks that it's a bunch of bullshit and it's just a crock excuse. This only draws Sarah and Alton closer together, as they are comfortably flirting while drinking wine together. Camilla tells Brennan to not speak to her, where he's literally trying to give her a compliment and to prepare her positively. And the two of them start arguing, where he mentions that she needs therapy and she is tired of him never speaking his mind. She flicks them off, and then the both of them are getting loud and in one another's faces. And it's even more awkward knowing that he mentioned that she's made racist remarks to him on Cutthroat. Chad does overhear Trishelle campaigning to Dustin to get Sarah out, and he calls out their antics, essentially. And he also calls Trishelle out for being a conspiracy theorist, since all Sarah and Alton talk about is the stars and shit, since he hears their conversations. We then have Cara Maria and Camilla arguing again about who needs to go in, since Cara Maria mentions that Camilla said that she wanted to go home, but Camilla changed her mind. Fresh Meat could not decide, so Las Vegas chooses for Cara Maria and Brandon to go into elimination, with Sarah and Chet volunteering to go into the elimination. The pair the pair compete in Not So Fast, where they have to wrap their ropes around the circular bar, and they have to go to their opponent's they have to go through their opponent's rope to unwrap it. Sarah and Chet do beat Cara Maria and Brandon, and we do see more of Devin and Eric getting closer to one another. I think this is arguably Cara Maria's least notable season. All I remember is her and Camilla bickering for a minute each episode about which one of them should go into elimination, but they seemed irrelevant compared to all the dynamics in the season overall. She was definitely the expendable person who just kept saying yes to calls at this point, which is why I think she kept on getting put on these seasons randomly. This is also another example where Brennan doesn't do much of anything and got booted early through though seeing him and Camilla interacting makes me uncomfortable. I'm not shocked that he's starting to wind down, with him only having one more season after this for a while, since he just doesn't really offer anything to the show, competitively or personality wise. So we start the episode with everyone having fun on the sea, and Devin is really feeling Eric, where she dates older men usually, and we see Trishelle telling Knight that his team is not a threat to her team, and Knight doesn't trust Team Vegas whatsoever, after they threw New Orleans under the bus. Nanny is looking for her laundry and no one knows where it is, but it ends up in the pool. And Jimmy immediately knows that Knight put it in the pool, though he tried to deny it. It's interesting that Jimmy is lecturing him about throwing Nanny's clothes in the pool, especially when she would do that in Vendettas to Kaylee. Or, no, maybe it wasn't the pool. I think she threw her stuff down the stairs, but it's a similar dichotomy. Anyways, Jemmy tells Nanny about what Knight did, and she snaps, and Camilla does snap in Nanny's defense as well, after seeing her stuff in the pool. Knight then decides to do more by getting Nanny's suitcase and throwing it in the pool. And then we have Dustin and a few others having fun with getting it back, and I like how they made it a positive situation, where Frank does lecture Knight about his dumb move, where the house is bonding over them not liking New Orleans, and he realizes that they are a liability. Don't Weigh Me Down is the daily, where we have some strategizing where St. Thomas wants to sabotage Brooklyn, since if they get safely, St. Thomas will go into elimination based on the hierarchy set in the house. But Trey does not want to sabotage his friends, even if it is to save his own ass, but the entire alliance wants this to happen. Anyways, the challenge involves some people on the team holding a basket and a bunch of people throwing rocks in a bunch of buckets. The house targets Brooklyn immediately, causing them to go into elimination, and then they target Fresh Meat next. Frank is snapping because a few people decided to have the gall to put rocks in San Diego's bucket. And of course, Frank is being hypocritical. Vegas sees the hierarchy of the alliance, with them being targeted and people not going after Cancun, which is definitely pissing Nany off. Cancun wins the daily, and the alliance tells Marie and Rob that their two teammates are weakening them. And Marie is pissed off with Trey and Laura not contributing at all, but she sees this as a huge stab in the back. Cancun decides to throw in Fresh Meat against Brooklyn, where they are competing in something mental. Devin knows that she and JD are going in at this point, and Trey confronts CJ about how his team had to go to bat for him, since he was going to go into elimination before things changed. Essentially. And Chet somehow gets involved in this and calls out CJ for being fake as hell, and he's kind of getting exposed. Devin and Eric do end up kissing since they realize that one of them won't be here after tonight, or after this round. Camilla snaps about how the new generation of competitors are not competitors, and Jemmy decides to call her out when they are on the bus. Devin starts yelling for some reason, I don't remember the context of it, and Jemmy has to hold or be held back from going after Camilla, and this explains why they end up as rivals in the next season. Camilla throws some strays tonight about Jemmy not loving him and how she will never love him, which pisses Knight off hugely. Nany ends up defending Camilla since he does not like a guy getting in a woman's face, and Knight tells Nany to fuck off, and she loses her shit, where she has to be held back by several people in the house. Jemmy attempts to calm Nany down, and the latter is losing her mind, where she is crying on the floor and has to be comforted by Dustin, where she is trying to quit and throwing her mic off. Nany throws something at Knight, and it's a huge mess. During the next morning, Nany realizes that the alliance is San Diego and Cancun, where everyone else is essentially expendable. For some reason, Devin and Eric end up getting into an argument about some sort of number. I didn't really remember what the context of the number was until I realized it's about him wanting her to answer the biggest age difference between the people that she has dated, and she doesn't feel comfortable sharing that. But we do have Jemmy and Knight calming down and diffusing the situation, which is nice. Of course, the two end up making up, and Eric is worried about not being good enough for her. Elimination is water torture, where one person is going to be hanging upside down by the ropes, and when the other partner moves to do the puzzle, they are getting drowned underwater, where they have to learn the puzzle and hold their breath under the water. Seeing people drown underwater is not my favorite, and we will see this elimination a few times in the future, and the potential for hypothermia is large and not exciting at all. Ultimately, this elimination turns into a huge mess, where Eric quit in the elimination midway because he is over it, and they are not communicating well, and Camilla is furious. She really goes in on him, and she starts climbing the wall again, as she will do it all by herself. She calls him a disgrace to the human race, how he is a selfish motherfucker, and how he should go to hell. Honestly, this is the rare situation where I actually side with Camilla over this, as it was just a really pathetic showing of Eric, and it's proof that what everyone said about him regarding his attitude and his performance is true. Neither one of them were likable throughout the season at all. Camilla picking fights about who should go in got very old. She didn't fit into the dynamics here at all. But I can't lie, I did feel a bit bad for her with the Eric stuff. Speaking of Eric, What a pathetic and lame showing of him, especially with him quitting the elimination in the manner that he did. His showing with Devin was shocking, but I'm just glad that he's finally gone from the flagship as his stick got old like 3 seasons ago, though he does make an appearance on All Stars. PG tells them that the rotations of elimination start over again. Chairman of the board is the daily of the episode, where one person sits on the chair at the edge, and if you get the trivia wrong, you fall under the water. It's the basic trivia challenge that we've seen before, and it's usually prevalent throughout this era, and even era 4. Trishelle has to sit out of the challenge for being dehydrated, but it was a fun enough challenge. New Orleans is going straight to the arena, and San Diego wins the daily. Jonay wants Vegas to go in, and Frank is annoyed that she rolled her eyes. And the Alliance is struggling with who's going to go into elimination. Though Team Brooklyn goes in once again, with the elimination being Endurance. Chet and Sarah are hoping that they will gain respect in the house if they win this elimination, and hopefully they'll be left alone. We do see Preston and Mackenzie are observing the sunlight where they are resigned to going in, and this is the first time we see them throughout the season. The elimination is balls out, and just based on the edit and the skills of the players, it isn't shocking that Sarah and Chet beat Preston and Mackenzie. So, I literally do not remember a thing they did this season. They got absolutely no camera time on the season until right before they went into elimination. And I think this was the issue of Battle of the Seasons having too many people. The first season also suffered from this as well. I am shocked that Preston came back, though I think they only did it because they wanted Knight back, and next season is another rival season. So Alton is minding his own business, working out in the gym, and Zach and Frank decide to get under Alton's skin as he's working out in the gym, and them just becoming even bigger assholes than they were beforehand. Frank makes some comment about strength coming in numbers and not in personality. Alton dares him to say it to his face, and Frank does. Zach and Frank are trying to size Alton up, and the mentions that Sarah must like the moves Alton makes with his muscles and would ride him. A part of me is wondering if Frank was attracted to Alton because the comments that he was making and the way he looked, it just really wasn't necessary and kind of gives me Polly and Theo vibes, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Anyways, Alton says the same about Frank and Zach potentially hooking up, and it's ironic because Lacey joked about it at the same time. I don't know if some people would take this as homophobic or not, but whatever. There's some bumping happening between the two of them when it comes to bumping their chests and whatever, and we do move on with Alton ranting to the others about him being with idiots, as he does not want to go to the beach due to avoiding Frank and Zach. And this sucks because in this era, compared to Alton's prior seasons, they all had to leave to go out together, and if one person doesn't want to leave, they all have to stay inside. So that's why a lot of the cast was mad at Alton. He starts arguing with Sarah because she doesn't like how he doesn't want to go outside due to what I just explained earlier. A bunch of people do not like Alton's attitude, and Frank is even more pissed off as he moves on, and it causes Frank and Dustin to argue randomly since Dustin has to hear Frank whine and complain about it. And he dares Dustin to step to him, and they essentially end up breathing in one another's face, chest bumping, and nothing is going to happen. Yet, we'll get to that when we get to that. Insane Games is the daily where it's essentially an Olympics-like game where there's a chariot race, an egg drop, ear paw, and the Trojan horse. And I really do like this daily where seeing all of these challenges were fun but simplistic as well. Knight and Jimmy do win the daily, and Marie is annoyed that Laura, their weakest competitor, is competing in the fish hitting contact race or competition on a tiebreaker where the loser automatically goes to elimination, but her teammates blow her off. St. Thomas gets last and Brooklyn beats them, where Trey has a nonchalant attitude about it all. Alton speaks to Zach about trying to get sent in because Alton wants to go, where he tells his teammates that he wants to lose an elimination so he can go. Trishelle is annoyed with this, since this isn't Alton. I mean, she saw him completely dominate the gauntlet, so this makes sense. And Annie does not want to purposely lose, and he clearly does not want to quit without going into an elimination, because someone who outright quits and just leaves without going to elimination looks awful, and he knows that for someone who's comp based like him, it would be a really weak look. So he wants to have his cake and eat it, essentially. He wants the kids to have their fun, and the challenge is not it for him anymore. Knight and Jamie send in Las Vegas, and the other three talk about not wanting to send Alton in, since he might throw it, which means Dustin would have to go in. Alton speaks to Sarah about his predicament, and she's over his wishy-washiness in this regard. Laura and Trey do end up going in for St. Thomas, and Nanny and Dustin go in for Vegas, where they compete in Not So Fast. CJ and Alton decide to argue right after elimination takes place, since they're expecting Alton to go in and they think he's a coward for backing out of it. And then Zach gets involved in Alton's face for some reason, and then throws Alton's hat off his head. And it's all just so damn ridiculous. Anyways, Dustin and Nanny do end up beating Trey and Laura in the elimination, but Zach states that Alton is lucky that he can't fight him, and Alton is realizing that the entire house hates him. I literally do not remember a single thing Laura did during the season, and she made it midway through. Other than Maria thinking that it was dumb that she did the tiebreaker. Not shocked she never came back, but I am shocked that Trey was given another season, after him actively refusing to play politics and being boring in general regarding his personality and interactions with the others, but he was allowed on this season. But I guess he got enough screen time, so maybe that's why he came back. I'm assuming they brought him back because they really wanted Zach back, and Zach didn't have any other notable partners that would be willing to come back. Brooklyn created a game called Insane Games, which I'm assuming they did in their real world season, and they're doing it so they can get people to like them socially, and I found this to be a really fun slash lighthearted moment on the episode. Ashley and CG are getting along really well, and they are somewhat flirting with one another, though Ashley doesn't see things the same way that he does. The daily is locked out, where they have to climb the top of a mountain to solve three puzzle checkpoints, and this is essentially the first mini final, if I'm remembering it correctly. You have to carry one log at a time, and Cancun knows that Brooklyn and Las Vegas are gunning for them. Sam is slowing down during the daily, and it is really pissing off her teammates, especially Zach and Frank, where the three of them really start snapping at one another. It does hint at how things will go for them in the final, and none of the three of them are coming off well during this. Brooklyn wins the daily, and Frank touches Sam to somewhat try to usher slash push her, and she then pushes him back, where he makes fun of her for being fat, and she wasn't even fat here. And then Ashley finally starts snapping at the puzzle. New Orleans gets last place, so they are going into elimination, where Brooklyn immediately comes to the conclusion to target San Diego in hopes that they go home. We move on to Zach and Frank arguing about Sam's poor performance and the rest of them being too mad. But Zach thinks that Frank went on for way too long and he catered to Frank's ego, and Zach isn't going to cater to it anymore. Essentially, it is that infamous Spider-Man gif where they are calling one another out for being egotists with huge tempers when they do the same thing. Brooklyn decides to throw in San Diego since they targeted them twice anyways, and they are playing a mental elimination since Brooklyn knows, or they assume, that San Diego sucks in this element. Frank knows that he and Ashley are going in, since that's what they spoke about earlier, and we have the men arguing about Frank apparently throwing Zach under the bus to go to elimination, where they made a deal about Frank going in during a mental elimination prior. CJ gives Ashley flowers, and Jamie and Marie read CJ's notes to Ashley and others publicly to a bunch of people. So they write a fake love letter pretending that it is from Ashley. San Diego talked about the agreement, and Sam mentions that she will go in since she's stuck in the daily. And then we have Zach and Frank going back and forth again about Frank breaking his handshake agreement, and Frank mentioning that neither wants to go in because they both think that Sam sucks and she will automatically lose the elimination, and they don't want to go home with her. Frank mentions that he is smarter than Zach, and Zach gets in his face, and they're about to get physical with one another, presumably. Frank is trying to console Sam and mentions that she is family, but it hurts her that neither one of them believe in her. Ashley and CJ realize that they are pranked with the note, and they do have a laugh about it. Sam volunteers, and the guys refuse to volunteer, where Brooklyn chooses Zach to go in. Water Torture is the elimination where San Diego does beat New Orleans.
San Diego comes back after the elimination, and there's still tension between Zach and Frank. Well, the former doesn't think Frank would have cared if they were eliminated. Mark and Jamie have an interesting dynamic this season, even though I didn't really like Knight at all. I found his actions to be pretty hard towards the women, but never kept that same energy towards the men. Jamie had that drunken fight with Camilla, and that caused them to be partners in the next season. Though I did find her commentary to be pretty fun, so I'm not shocked that she came back after this season.
There's still tension with Frank and Zach, and the latter is trashing Kim to Jasmine, and Jonay is talking about her relationship with Zach, though she's still not over with her ex from 2 years ago, who took off and threw all of her positions out. So she really needs the money this season, and things are tough for her when it comes to her situation in her real life. Hunger Games is their daily, where they have to guess the amount of stuff they can eat. Frank is apologizing to Zach, and the latter is literally continuing to pick fight with him, calling him a coward and a few other stuff. It is one of the few eating challenges that doesn't make me want to throw up watching it, so this is a really good one. Brooklyn wins the power team once again, and I believe it's the second one in a row. And San Diego is going straight to elimination for getting last. San Diego speak, and we have some more bickering with Zach and Frank, since the latter mentions that if he doesn't trust him, Zach should want Frank to leave. Frank calls Zach an asshole, and Zach is over Frank, playing the victim, and Frank mentions that he hates everyone on his team. Frank has a tantrum and is tired of looking like a crazy person, and Marie doesn't know how to react at all. Brooklyn decides to nominate Cancun, and it's going to be a physical elimination. CJ feels confident about going into a physical elimination, and he wants to go with the strongest female teammate. But Janae does not want to go into elimination, since she is here to win and wants guaranteed money, and her teammates think that it is selfish. And essentially, Janae is definitely being a coward here, since they all know that she is a stronger competitor, meaning that she has a bigger chance of winning an elimination than Jasmine does. Zach ends up crying to Jonay, and he really does not like the predicaments that they are in, and he appreciates her tough journey in her life, since he was given everything in his life compared to her. Devin is wearing her natural hair because it was a part of her deal that if they won 2 dailies, she would have to go without her wigs. And we get Sam and Zach volunteering for elimination. Again, and Jasmine volunteers, which is a dumb move on her part, to go in with CJ. And it's a hall brawl, and it's the most infamous hall brawl in challenge history. Women like Nanny, Trishelle, and Devin do not like the fact that Janae did not volunteer, manipulated Jasmine, and don't want her to make it to the end without going into an elimination. So they really just do not like Janae here. Sam completely washes Jasmine in the elimination, but Zach initially loses his 2 rounds against CJ. Due to this, it causes for a tie, and a coin flip has to determine who will break the tie, and it lands on the guy. Where in the tiebreaker, the first person to win twice ends up winning. CJ beats him in the first one, so if you combine all the rounds, he technically won 3 rounds, and Zach changes his strategy in the last 2, causing Zach to beat CJ. Things do start to repair with San Diego, so they are at this moment on a pretty good place, or on good terms. Jasmine was relatively fun this season, as she didn't engage in the drama like that, especially compared to her other 2 seasons, but she didn't do a whole lot throughout the season at all either, though she did have some fun background chat and commentary. CJ was able to get his revenge on Wes right away, and then had that thing with Ashley for an episode or 2, but he kind of just enabled San Diego, especially with the whole Alton situation. What you remember him for is the elimination, but there just isn't much there, so I'm not shocked that this is his final season, though you would think that they would have called him for All-Stars, but I guess things just didn't align. San Diego is clearly closer at this point, and they're communicating well here. Abandoned ship is the challenge where they have to grab a buoy in the water, and Rob freaks out about not being able to get underwater, and Trishelle is also panicking about not doing or not going underwater, and she's annoyed that her male teammates are not asking if she is okay, but are just demanding for her to go down. Autumn ends up getting a 5-minute penalty for getting it for her, and then they have to sail to the coast. Alton and Dustin are picking arguments with Trishelle, and it's all just pointless at this point. It's a decent enough daily where we do see San Diego win the daily, and St. Thomas is going into elimination for getting last. Alton wants Dustin Dustin and Trishelle to make up, but Trishelle does not want to speak to them, especially Dustin, as he makes it clear that he is not genuine with the apology, as he is quote unquote, emphasis on the quote unquote, apologizing, where the two of them end up continue going at one another in this, and she doesn't like his tone, and he hates her attitude. Dustin mentions that she is going in, she doesn't like him, and she does not want to be around him, and Trishelle makes that very clear. San Diego does decide to send in Vegas, since they were second to last in the elimination, and they are doing an endurance elimination. Nanny is over the bullshit excuses, and she is getting drunk, where she is popping off, and Frank does not appreciate it at all. Nanny thinks that Derek is not a good friend. They were apparently friends before this, which I didn't know. And then Frank decides to defend Derek, so the two of them are essentially tag teaming Nanny here. Marie decides to get involved to defend Nanny, and she does not care about their alliance anymore. Nanny and Derek end up chest bumping one another, and she calls him a bitch. He ends up pushing Rob down, and Marie pushes Derek because she isn't going to let that happen with Rob getting assaulted, essentially. Sam ends up getting pushed by accident since I think she was like behind Derek and he kind of fell on her. And Sam's on the floor for a while. Rob and Derek are going at it now, and Sam now wants to go after Marie, who is being pulled back by Rob. Marie tells Frank that she will toe tag Sam, and Frank is trying to be a mediator at this point. But that does not last long at all. Somehow, Nanny and Frank end up going at it, where he decides that he's going to berate her, where he makes fun of her sister for having a heroin addiction and says that she should inject herself again, which is just way too far and way too nasty. Dustin and Nanny decide to go at it once again, and Frank makes fun of Dustin for doing gay porn. And I find this ironic because half of the challenge alumni now have OnlyFans accounts, and they actively promoted Polly's OnlyFans on Battle of the Era. So I just find it interesting how we've evolved in 12 years regarding this. So he calls them fat punks, and they aren't fat, and he's threatening to get physical. Frank and Dustin decide to step to one another, and Dustin wants to get street rich on that Catholic schoolboy. Dustin ends up smacking slash pushing. It's kind of like a combination of the both. Frank's head, and Zach now has to hold Frank back. This is a complete utter mess, and it's one of the craziest and most physical fights ever, with so many people having their physical moments, and absolutely nothing is done by the producers. Alton tries to calm Dustin down, lecturing him about getting down to Frank's level, and he's tired of being around a bunch of children this season. Alton tells Trishelle that he wants to leave, but it causes the women to feel compromised, since if he's throwing it, one of the women will have to go home with him, and Alton does not want to speak to the group about it anymore. Trishelle knows that he is going to throw it and does not appreciate the two men who are apparently like brothers now tag teaming her, and she thinks that they are very crazy, where she would prefer to go in with Dustin instead of Alton. Trishelle does not volunteer to go in, despite her being the reason why they perform so poorly in the daily, causing Nanny to volunteer, which infuriates Dustin, and Alton decides to volunteer to partake in Balls Out. Dustin and Trishelle are arguing on the sidelines right before the elimination takes place, since she was the reason why they lost, and she should be in the elimination arena right now. Marie and Rob do beat Alton and Nanny, and it's clear that Alton threw it, and Dustin is sad that his siblings, since he considers them both siblings, are going home now, and he's stuck with Trishelle, who he hates. Brooklyn tries to play mediator between Dustin and Trishelle, but it goes nowhere, where Dustin states that he is going to quit. Nanny definitely had a great rookie season as she gave a lot of fun commentary and got into a lot of fights throughout the season. So is it shocking that she became one of the longest running figures from this era and one of the women who's done some of the most seasons? So when it comes to Alton, he definitely had an interesting journey this season. He didn't have the same competitive or physical prowess that he had in his best seasons, and he was checked out. But seeing him adapt to a new generation was kind of interesting to me, though I hate that he threw it, which he admitted in the years since. He is also a prime example of someone who is just cast for physical prowess, and when you don't have much of that anymore, there really just isn't a whole lot there. But he does return for All Stars 1. But I don't think that helped his reputation at all. Despite all of the talk about quitting, Dustin doesn't end up quitting, essentially talks him into staying. Brooklyn is still very confident, and they know that they need to continue targeting Cancun and San Diego, who will throw them in if they win. Force Field is the daily where they will wear these large rings and they have to push others out of the ring and into the mud. And dailies like this are always fun to watch. The Brooklyn women immediately target the Cancun and San Diego women, and Zach is pissed off, with Frank also being pissed, but nowhere near as much as Zach. Devin and Sarah are pissed with JD for causing them to DQ, with the women doing so well, but that's kind of cancelled out due to JD DQing. San Diego win for the men's section, and we see Brooklyn arguing at the end of the challenge due to what I just described above. Las Vegas are going into elimination from being last, and San Diego do win the daily. Sam is still not over Marie pushing her in the last episode, but Marie is Frank's friend, and he does not want to send in St. Thomas, so he is vouching for her when it comes to the team meeting. Devin and Chet talk about if they are nominated, JD and Devin will be the ones who go in. San Diego speaks to Brooklyn about them potentially taking out Vegas, and of course Brooklyn does not want to go in, but San Diego gives them an option pertaining the elimination. Meaning like what type of elimination they would want to do out of the four options. The same thing happens when San Diego speaks to St. Thomas, and Marie sees that she's being an expendable pawn, where she asks them if they spoke to Cancun about potentially being nominated, and Zach says no, and he is actively protecting Jonay. And he can do that because San Diego are winning the dailies. And Marie sees it for what she is, and she is pissed off. Frank is actually very torn up about this, and I think he starts crying. So I do think he's being sincere here, with Zach and Sam wanting to send Marie home. So it's really Zach and Sam, the ones who are really pushing this, and they get their wishes with San Diego nominating St. Thomas for eviction, and they're playing the mental game, where Rob said that he wanted strategic or physical, so they're actively going out of their way to screw St. Thomas over. San Diego are avoiding eye contact with Marie, which is pissing her off even more, and she's bawling her eyes out on the bus when they go out. Marie ends up snapping at Frank during the club and tells him that she will never be friends with him again, and Frank cannot believe that he is weaponizing their friendship like this, and he was helpless. I know this doesn't last because he was literally tweeting about Marie in a positive way a few days ago, so. And this is based off of as I'm recording this. Anyways, Rob tries to defend her, and Frank gets in his face, where they have to be separated. Marie then rents on a bus ride back home and tells everyone that she hates them. She threatens to toe tag Sam, and then Zach defends Sam, where Rob has to restrain Marie. Marie confronts Sam back in the house and she calls her a bunch of slurs. She starts yelling at the weirdo JD and makes fun of his dolphin trainer job, which is such a weird thing to make fun of. She also makes fun of Derek, who tells her to win and go home, and she also makes fun of his voice. And you can take that however you take it. They continue to argue, and Rob mentions that Derek is riding on Janae's coattails. The two men start arguing back and forth. Chet then pushes Rob in Derek's defense, and Derek and Rob are continuing to try to fight one another, and Frank separates it. And this is clear why they end up being partners next season. We see Trishelle and Chet flirt with one another before we get to the elimination, which is water torture, where Trishelle and Dustin beat Marie and Rob. The episode ends with an announcement of them moving to Namibia for the semi-final challenge and the final. In addition, okay, yeah, I already could have said in addition to the final. And most of the cast don't know where or what Namibia is, which is just so embarrassing. So Rob woke up finally during his final episode, and he wasn't pathetic like Trey was, but I don't recall him doing a whole lot in the season. But in general, I really didn't mind him. But his conflict with Derek was enough to gain him another season, where he might have been a one season wonder without it, I guess. Marie was definitely a lot like Nanny for St. Thomas, where she was a very fiery personality and a very fiery piece of conflict wherever she went, and I do give her credit for attempting to be the more strategic person on her team. It is not a shock that the producers called her for many years after this, even though she continually rejected it up until the very last season of this era, or the last two seasons of this era and entering era 4. So they moved to Namibia, and they partake in the Slingshots Daily, where a driver has to go on a four-wheeler to jump into the ocean, swim, ring the bell, and then swim back to the finish line, or swim to the finish line. It's a fun enough daily challenge, though making a bunch of people throw up is just weird. Cancun is going straight to elimination since they lost, and Las Vegas wins the daily, beating Brooklyn, and they have to choose to send someone in right now, right as the challenge finished, where they obviously choose San Diego, since the two teams are close. San Diego and Cancun, I'm referring to. And they have to do a strategy elimination. Frank is pissed off with Sam making fun of his performance in the challenge to the others, and then he starts bashing Sam to a few of the others, where she doesn't even deserve to sign where he claims that she doesn't even deserve to shine his shoes. Sarah gives Jonay advice on how to do not so fast, even though she hates speaking to Jonay in general. So I'm assuming Sarah's still salty about that elimination loss from Rivals a year ago at this point. Anyways, Not So Fast is the elimination where Ashley and Frank are competing for San Diego, and Frank and Ashley do end up beating Jonay and Derek in this elimination. And Jonay is very sad because she was out right before the final, where if she was in the final, she would have gotten guaranteed money due to her lifetime circumstances, and it would have helped with that, but she didn't get it here. Jonay had her showman with Zach, which was somewhat decent, just looking at the season, but it's definitely more uncomfortable to watch due to the backstory or knowing what happens in XS2 and watching it back. Though I know they made up recently and she was on his podcast not long ago. But in general, Jonay's scared gameplay really did annoy me, though it did seem like she was kind of being slut-shamed a lot in the season, especially by the women, but I did feel bad for her hearing more of her backstory. Derek is someone that I find very hard to get into overall, and I don't really know why. He did get into a few arguments during the season, and he showed some potential as a character, but it really wasn't enough in general. I guess it was enough for him to get on Rivals too, but we'll talk more about this later. But Derek's definitely kind of a supporting character at best. I'll just say that. Chriselle and Chet speak about how they are as strong as their weakest player, and Chet knows that Devin is a liability, though Trishelle is worried about how she and Dustin will perform since it's just the two of them and they aren't on good terms. The final consists of them jumping out of a plane, running to a checkpoint in the middle of the desert, where Sam is already slowing down and slowing her team, essentially, and the same thing is happening with Devin slowing down the Brooklyn team. Then they have to do a puzzle in the minefield, run to a wrung out checkpoint where they have to throw a hook on some pole or whatever, or drink hot ass milk. Sorry, and drink hot ass milk. The leads do alternate, with Vegas having a lead at some point, then San Diego, then Brooklyn, then San Diego back again. Brooklyn is getting more frustrated with Devin, and San Diego gets furious with Sam, where Zach has to literally lift her up at certain points and to host her up. The next checkpoint is where they have to create a transportation mechanism to move the tires, where Trishelle and Dustin start bickering at this point. Vegas then passed Brooklyn with now being second, and then the next part is flying on a helicopter to get to their next destination, where they have to run to the camel nap checkpoint, which is at night, and three people have to watch over a camel while the other person goes to sleep. And obviously, in a team of two, only one person will have to stay up and watch the camel. San Diego has an 11 minutes lead the next morning, with Vegas having a 6-minute lead due to Devin stepping out of the box. The others got more time. Zach starts pushing Sam up the hill as some sort of a guide, but it's still odd, and then we move on to the next checkpoint, which is a word decoder. There is a sand shift checkpoint at this point, and they're almost at the final checkpoint where Frank literally pushes Sam onto the floor, which is pathetic and lame. And I do think that people, meaning the cast, would have been more sympathetic if Sam was more feminine, where they would have seen it more as a man hitting a woman, but because of her appearance, they started justifying it, especially at the reunion, from what I remember. Anyway, San Diego does win the season, with Vegas getting second and Brooklyn getting third. I thought Brooklyn was a very entertaining team, especially with them not really speaking in the 4 years since their Real World season, and they were seen as the quote unquote vet team that lasted. Sarah came off as more likable this season, but I think it's because she had to blend in with a whole new group of people and was the last vet surviving, which made for an interesting dynamic, even with her showmance with Alton. Chet was pretty fun this season with his commentary, and we did see him fired up here and there throughout the season, and I did like his dynamic with his teammates. It's a shame that his time on the show is ending very soon. Devin was hilarious with her commentary, though her showmance with Eric was something, and I like how self aware she was about her not being a good competitor, and she was just a breath of fresh air. It's crazy that JD is so invincible this season, despite making it to the final and being on one of the underdog teams. But it makes sense why he never came back. And I think he was only on this season for a circumstantial situation, or he probably would have been a one season wonder otherwise. Combining the two Vegas seasons onto a team and the seasons, which were a decade apart, was a weird but interesting choice. And it was cool to see Trishelle come back after like 9 years to play with people she didn't know, and damn near everyone she did play with on the Inferno and the Gauntlet were no longer on the show. But this was her best season competitively and personality wise, so she was a refreshing add here. Dustin finally got to show off his potential from last season, especially from a competitive point of view, and I did like his conflicts he got in throughout the season, and he really showed a lot more personality. It is really a shame that he didn't accept the next season, since the momentum that he had in this season, and that would have continued into the next season, essentially dissipated when he did come back, but we'll talk more about that when we get to those seasons. San Diego as a team were insufferable as hell. And while they did deserve their win, I do think it makes the season worse. I'm personally not the type of person who lets the winner of a season affect my rankings when it comes to reality TV shows, where in general, I really don't give an F who wins, and it doesn't really make or break my experience with a season. But this is kind of one of the rarer cases. Ashley is the most irrelevant of the group for sure, though she had that weird interaction with CJ for an episode or two. She was definitely the calmest person, but she came off like an enabler a lot of the time as well. But she didn't stand out much in general. Sam is someone I feel sorry for pertaining Zach and Frank's treatment of her, mainly with how excessive they were. But she was a weaker link on the team when it comes to endurance, and she had a smug attitude when interacting with others too, so I didn't really find her likable. Speaking of the unlikable twosome, both Zach and Frank were really hypocritical with accusing the other of doing what they always or what they themselves do, with throwing tantrums, getting aggressive, and treating everyone like crap. But I do think that Frank came off as a lot more hinged, since he was like that from the very beginning, where Zach attempted to be calmer earlier on in the season, but still, Zach was really in no position to judge. Despite their behavior, they did show a lot of potential pertaining being good at challenges, so I see why they came back, with Zach really being the only one who is a consistent staple. Though, as we all know, Ashley, Sam, and Frank are all going to be on All Stars 5, so it'll be interesting to see their dynamics with one another 12 years later, and most of this team reuniting there. If I recall correctly, I believe I said, or at least I thought, that last season is the season thus far that dropped significantly from my rewatch opinions to how I felt about it before the rewatch. But this season is the one that has done the opposite, where I was very low on this season before the rewatch, and now it rose a lot on my rankings, where I kind of see it as a middle tier season, or at least from the 23 seasons that I've ranked so far. We do have a lot of rookies who are very memorable and make their mark, either from a competitive point of view, a drama personality point of view, or a combination of them, whether you like them or not. Though there are some issues with there being way too many people on the season where a lot of them were invisible and unnotable. Some of the dailies and eliminations were pretty hit or miss, in my opinion. And while there was a lot of drama, some of it was way too toxic and way too out of control as well, where it's kind of hard to watch. And you see the unlockable a-holes win the season, and their toxicity is rewarded, which sometimes I wouldn't mind on other seasons, but with this crop of people, it just feels very weird. And just when I thought I'd be lucky with finding the reunion for the season, which I do remember watching when I watched the season last year, but I guess they removed it. The reunion also just sucked too. They all kind of just coddled Frank, especially regarding his behavior with Sam, with even Ashley was kind of male identified and all of that, and the reunion was just a mess. Ultimately, we've seen in seasons before this and seasons after this, just because you do well on a season without most of the veterans, it doesn't mean that you're going to have longevity. So next season, which is Rivals 2, was clearly a way to set up this new crop of people to not only blend in and interact with the veterans, but for the feuds that were created from this season to make it onto another season, hoping that it would be a multi-season thing. And we'll talk about how it was a success for some of them, but it was a failure for others. I feel like this is the season where we finally got rid of a lot of the leftover from Era 2 regarding the storylines and some of the people leaving, though we still have the last crop leave after next season. But I think this is kind of where you see Era 3 has officially started, and there's no leftover between the two eras like the prior two seasons. I honestly think a lot of the reason why this season is so hated is because it was a rookie heavy season and you don't have the same old vets taking over the screen time. With a lot of seasons like this, most of the complaints are kind of falling flat. They love toxicity in some of the other vet heavy seasons, but the one here is seen as the worst. They don't like that the veterans were taken out immediately and the rookies made names for themselves, though you need the rookies. You need rookies to fuel the show so they can eventually become vets. And I don't even like the argument of, oh, there are no vets, acting like the vets just became vets out of nowhere. They were rookies at some point, and they were also new, where they needed to make an impression, and they had to work their way to being vets. And that doesn't happen if you only have veterans and you don't have rookies. And I think people are afraid of new things. When it comes to new people, they offer new storylines, new friendships, new alliances, new romantic relationships, new sexual relationships, new conflicts, and they don't like the feeling of the people who they associate with the show potentially being replaced. If honestly this was a vet heavy season and the exact same antics happened here, I don't think many people would have cared about it. People always talked about the rookies needing to take over and to boot the veterans, and that's something that's even more of an issue with Era 4, but it's actually done here and people don't like it. I do see a lot of the complaints about the season, but I do think some of it are stretches. Anyways, that is my opinion on the season, and I'm looking forward to watching more Era 3 and to continue with this challenge rewatch. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Bye!